This is the Creative Mindset Podcast, and I'm your host, Chris Roussakis. Today we have coach, therapist, and consultant Chris Chang with us. Chris, thank you for being here. Really nice to see you on a bright and sunny Saturday afternoon.
Hey, thanks for having me here, Chris.
Yeah, nice to have you. Now, Chris and I have known each other for probably 7 years now, meeting on the cycling circuit of Ottawa, in the mean streets of Ottawa, going around on our bikes and wearing spandex together. And it's been a while since we've done that, but in most recent history, Chris and I have been working on some video projects for his business, Humaxis, which is, something that even to this day I don't quite really understand, but I think that's maybe the point.
It could be one of the points.
So why don't you take us through, what Humaxis is a little bit, because I think it is an interesting business. I've had the chance to do some videos with you about, the thought processes that you have regarding, even world issues, but also, the internal power struggle that people deal with about becoming a better leader from within. And I think I would love to hear more about just what Humaxis really is to you, at least.
Yeah, so my work as an individual is kind of at this strange crossroads between executive coaching, therapy, mental health therapy, and kind of culture consulting, culture strategy consulting. And I came to it for a few reasons. One was because, quite frankly, working in the tech sector most of my career, I was actually a really bad employee.
Right, yeah.
Right? And I was just one of these orthogonal thinkers that was always seeing beyond the box that I was being given. And so I took to coaching because I needed help figuring out what the fuck I was doing.
Right.
And then when I saw what a really good coach was doing and how they could shift your thinking so radically, and the behaviors to go with it, then I thought, wow, I really like that. That's something I think I could do and something that I would really enjoy. And so I kind of dipped my feet into it in the the mid to late 2000s. And then there were some things that happened in the work that I was doing in the tech sector that made me think, wow, you know what? This is going to be in need in the future even more. And what I was seeing this disconnect between the clients that I was serving with technology and the type of technology we're bringing them, and just client inabilities to integrate new and complex technologies. And so these clients that I was working with, they were hitting this, what I would call like a wall of complexity around their world. And in some cases, this was having really catastrophic impacts. I'm talking about like life-critical impacts because organizations were failing in their mission to implement new technology. So briefly, people were dying as a result.
Right, and I think this goes back to some of the wording that I even found on your site about mission critical for people, right?
Yeah.
And why don't you explain for people that might not even know, what is mission critical for ourselves?
Yeah, I mean, mission critical means different things for different people, depending on the context they operate in a military or a defense and security context where I work often. Mission critical means life critical. It means that the decisions that we make can impact life outcomes. I think when we bring it down to like mission critical at the individual level, mission critical can simply mean like what is most valuable to you.
Right, yeah.
Right? Most valuable to you, your life, your family, your extended community, and like what is your thing that is make or break.
Right. And I think, if I was to break that down even further for the audience that watches this show, as artists, mission critical most often than not would likely mean, the ability to gain work and, you know, commissions or, you know, freelance work or whatever, but also have an impact with your work, right? So what are those roadblocks that sometimes impede us as creatives, I guess, you know? But yeah, I think that's the mindset where I'm at, where I think it's interesting where your head is at, especially for the clientele that you have. But I can also tie this back and see, you know, a lot of people probably watching the show today can self-identify what mission critical is to them, you know?
Yeah. I mean, if I think about my own kind of more amateur hobby relationship with the creative life in some ways.
That's right. Chris is an avid photographer, for those who care. Maybe we'll show some of his work up as he talks about this.
Yeah, so I mean, part of my mental health training is actually in the use of art as a therapeutic mode, and understanding the neuropsychology of that access to the creative. Like when I think of the work of a creative, for me, what's most mission critical, like if I think about the ability to acquire work, it's important, but you know, if you scale your business like you have to a certain degree, you can hire people who are non-creatives to do that client acquisition work, right? So I would rank it less mission critical than the actual work of organizing your life around that moment where you actually click the button, take the picture, capture the image, get that moment, that impression, or come up with that idea of text or narrative that actually pulls everything together and creates that magical moment.
So this is interesting. I'm willing to go down this road with you, where you kind of, you know, coach me / analyze me a little bit here. So you're saying at this point, my mission critical is still having the ability to open that creativity inside of me.
So I think like a universal that I would think of is we all have our domains of expertise, and another universal, or we aspire to have that domain of expertise. And we all, as human beings, live within this boundary of time and space, right? And so then the question becomes, well, how do I maximize the value of that time and space? Mm-hmm. What are those quintessentially magic moments that make or break my sense of identity, my sense of existence, and my ability to make a contribution in the world?
And are we talking about the obvious here? You know, finding a life partner, you know, reproduction, and, you know, going down the road of, you know, buying your first home and stuff like that. Like, are we talking about those kind of life achievements, or?
Well, I think those are all, those could be, like in the roadmap of a fulfilled life, those could all be markers on the road of a fulfilled life. But these were all transitory experiences, right? And so, you know, for the average person isn't buying a home every day.
Correct.
They aren't finding a new partner every day.
Well, there's probably a few of them out there.
Some of them are, right?
You know, especially in Hollywood.
Some more than others, right? You know, and of course, you know, there's, you know, depending on your perspective, there's nothing wrong with polyamory, right?
I mean, I've always wondered what it would be like to live in Utah and have a couple wives and, you know, explore that route of what life could be like. There's that show, and we are getting off topic here, but I forget what it is, but it's an A&E show, and it's about this guy and the 5 wives that he has and how he lives that life. And I watch him go through that, and I'm like, I don't know if it really is for me, because it's a lot of keeping up with the wives.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyways, back to our original conversation here. I think it would be, you know, almost worth it for some of our viewers to witness a little bit of a coaching session between you and I, if you're into that, it would allow me to open up a bit, and I'll allow people to see kind of the skill set / mindset that you have to put yourself in for your day-to-day job.
Yeah, sure. Kind of, is it all right if I pick up on that thread around time?
Yeah, 100%. I'll let you guide the ship.
Yeah, so one way of thinking about it is we're all mediating against time, right? A big part of the work that I'm doing right now and my own research is in this, what we would call a line of development. So you could say that there's human beings have multiple lines of development that constitute our ability to grow and develop. The average person, so brain development, just a little, can I give you a little bit of like the background, the developmental theory background?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because this might help just create a context for what I'm talking about. So the human brain continues to develop right up until about 25 or 26. So you could say from that perspective that adolescence actually continues right up until 25 or 26. A time which most people are done the bulk of their formal education. And what we notice in adult development is that most adults also, the general trajectory of their identity and who they think they are ends in that 25 up to maybe 30, and for some even 35. But for the majority of the population, I'm talking like 60 or 70% of the population, where they've arrived in that 25 to 35 year window, that's their sense of reality and who they are.
Right, and I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah.
Even for me, I would say it's very interesting to look back even on the last 5 years, which takes me to 28 years old, and the development that's taken place in that 5 years. I've gone through a divorce. I've lost a best friend. I've had somewhat of a career change from being, a sole proprietor to being part of a larger, organization. And, a lot of those things I could never have seen coming at a young age. That's not the life that, I thought I would have had. And I'm not saying that it's not the life that I've chosen to enjoy. I'm just saying I think a lot of us look at the journey of, even graduating from school or university, it's just, this is the path that I'm going on and I'm going to get there.
Yeah.
And we forget that it is very common to have some bumps along the way.
Yeah, it's really common to have bumps along the way, right? And so, like, I think one of the characteristics of a creative, creatives that survive and thrive, is that sense of boundary and how they interpret those bumps along the way, right? So what we know about adult development is that, one, as I mentioned, the majority of people, they plateau in terms of their sense of self and what they think is possible in terms of development in this 25 to 35 year window. And second, that we can actually activate what we would call multiple levels of development beyond that window if we bring our attention to it.
Okay, and what would those be then?
Well, so this brings us back to the conversation of lines of development and time, right? So there's a lot of really kind of traditional lines of development, like what is our cognitive development, right? So like you can tell different people have different qualities of cognitive and development depending on what they studied. Did they study hard maths, hard sciences, or did they study art, which is a very different type of cognition, right? Learning how to draw and understand visual relationships and spatial relationships and, other types of complex thinking. That's a very different type of cognitive quality than somebody who just studies calculus, right?
Of course.
We would talk about things like somatic, which is kind of a fancy word for, this intersection between physical, emotional, cognitive flexibility, right? There's emotional lines of development, social development. Some people are much more introverted in their social development. Others are much more extroverted. So there's actually quite a variety of lines of development.
Yeah, and I'm doing a little bit of self-awareness here and thinking about how this relates back to me. And, I even think about how my interaction outside of even photo shoots or video shoots with clients has just dramatically changed over the last couple of years. And I don't know, maybe it's the development of my ability to be more charismatic / articulate in those interactions with people, but maybe it is, deeper cognitively, I've just developed to the point where, I'm the full person that I'm going to be in my life.
Like my guess is, and when you say that, like what it feels to me is like this notion of I'm more charismatic or I'm more this or I'm more that. That feels very much at the surface level.
Sure.
Right. Knowing you and your little bit of your backstory and the transitions that you've gone through with personal loss, to me it has a feeling, there's a quality you could say of there's something deeper shifting in your relationship to yourself and in your relationship to the world.
Interesting. Yeah, I can agree to that, I think. I guess, I would ask you, because there's still development within the brain and creativity really comes from what you can process, what you can imagine in your own head. Is it safe to say that some artists will, only be at their peak by age 35, or?
I think there's a common notion of that in a lot of the literature. I think, in my own experience in the coaching and the therapy work that I do, what we're looking at is, regardless of where you're at when you're 35, what is the potential to unlock additional creative capacity,
yes,
right, in the way people think?
Let's go through that.
Yeah. So, and the literature would indicate that there's actually massive upside in terms of creative capacity. The literature would show, in my own experience, I think would concur that you can take an individual who has had a tightly constrained sense of identity, a tightly constrained sense of self for a variety of reasons, including early childhood trauma, situational trauma, any variety of circumstances, or quite frankly, just shitty parenting. And when you take them through a developmental process, they can have upticks of anywhere from like 15 to 25% just in terms of IQ, right? So our ability to take an individual who's feeling really tightly constrained and then put them on a growth and development trajectory that can be, quite frankly, meteoric for that sense of individual self, is really quite phenomenal. One of the areas I'm most excited right now, and I think this is really important for like classically visual creative artists, is just the notion of how the two sides of our brains work together.
Right. Yeah. I think you and I recently met up and we had gone through this, so I would love to hear you break it down one more time.
Yeah. So like like in pop culture, you often hear about the left and the right side of the brain.
Yeah, exactly.
And this notion that the left side of the brain is for cognitive functioning and that the right side of the brain is for quote unquote creative functioning. And what we know from the is that it just died?
It's still going.
It's still going. Okay.
It's still going. Yeah. Don't worry, guys. The screen has collapsed to black, but we're going to keep going. Keep going, Chris.
So what we know from the neuroscience is that both sides of the brain contribute equally to cognition. But what's different is that there are very different qualities of cognition between the left brain and the right brain. There's a famous artist, teacher, professor of art. Her name's Betty Edwards. She has a book called Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain. And she talks about how the left side of the brain is really our linguistic function. How, and it's one of the things that makes us unique as mammals, this human mammal, which is this naming, always identifying and turning, you might say it's turning subjects into objects.
Okay.
Right? I'm going to objectify that. And the way I do that is I do it by naming something. And we can see in children when this kind of linguistic function kind of overrides this other part of our brain, the right side of our brain. The right side of our brain is really what's significant in mapping relationships, specifically complex relationships. And there's a transition around 9 or 10 years old. 9 or 10 years old is the time when children want to gravitate towards realistic drawing, right? And so in a child who's developing and is being supported in that transition of brain development, they're the creatives where the right brain is actually going to come alive.
And it's about tapping into that, right?
It's about tapping into that. It's about creating a place where, because there's a lot of self-judgment. When a young child is unable to draw realistically, there's a lot of self-judgment. Oh, I must be stupid, or I just don't have any artistic talent. Like the number of adults that I work with who just have no artistic talent or believe they have no artistic talent. Like it's really, and I consider it endemic to our culture and our society. The lack of formal drawing that goes on in schools anymore, the lack of art programs in like formal, really classic art within the curriculum is a real problem. And so there's two parts of this. Like one part of it is this ability to see relationships, to be able to shut down the left hemisphere, which is talking, and just move into what we would call this liminal space. This space of, liminal space is a way of saying, like there's this, it feels kind of empty. This just pure, the place of a blank canvas that emerges when our mind feels really quiet and we can just be instead of talking about and trying to organize things linguistically. And then when we move into that relational space, we actually begin to see things and degrees of complexity in the world that we don't see otherwise.
Have you ever seen that movie Limitless?
Limitless. Yeah, I have, yeah.
Bradley Cooper
Yeah.
Finds a drug that unlocks the last 10% of your mind.
Yeah.
Or it could be 25% of your mind. I'm not sure. But it was about basically overpowering your brain with a drug he becomes someone that can, learn a language in an hour. He becomes someone that can learn the piano as a Mozart, symphony within minutes. And I'm wondering, is that really possible somewhere? Obviously without this, fictional drug that they had created for the film. Excuse me, I'm just wondering, is there a way to either internally unlock the full potential of our mind, or maybe it is an LSD thing and DMT thing, a mushroom trip that you got to go down to see a new perspective and recant that in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, that's my firm belief. My firm belief is that the potential of human capacity to see and solve complex problems, that we aren't even we're just so far from the limits of what that is, individually, biologically, culturally, socially, And there's a myriad of ways of doing that. I mean, you've mentioned some of the common ones, right? Like, the founders of Google are well-known, well-documented psychonauts, right? Like, they built the company off of their psychedelic imaginations, microdosing and macrodosing, the whole Burning Man culture of Silicon Valley.
Yeah,
right,
100%.
Is all built around the capacity and the potential of psychedelics to help us see, validate, and take action on complexity in ways that we haven't before. Yeah.
So I think it's worth stating that, even in the most recent months, I've been exploring mushrooms as a venue for trying to have fun, but also getting in that creativity that you can sometimes only see through the eyes of being on mushrooms,
Right.
And I'm also someone who has used cannabis for the last 15 years,
Yeah.
More recently in the last 5 years, every day,
Wow.
And even my business partner at Phantom Productions, Kyle Smedniak, Kyle at one point, when we were either writing proposals or coming up with scripts for projects, there was a point in time where he was pro-smoke, is what we called it.
Pro-smoke.
And it was like, Chris, I want you to do whatever you need to do to get into the headspace that you can just bang out a script in an afternoon. And it wasn't about, time sensitive, needing to be done in an afternoon. It was just that if I put myself in an environment that I felt comfortable with, and maybe it wasn't even, the THC in what I was smoking, it was just the habitual surrounding of the environment that I put myself in to be most creative.
Yeah, it almost sounds a little bit ritualistic from what you're saying. Like the THC was just kind of like the bonus, but like what are all the cultural practices and setup that I need to just cultivate that sense of presence and sink into my creative zone?
Yeah. And, I find, at least within the arts community that I know, there are a lot of people who I'm not sure have looked at it the same way, but are at least, experimenting with, these type of drugs that allow you to, have that third eye for a little while.
Yeah. Well, the thing about creatives, right? The thing about all creatives, regardless of how you manifest that, is we all tend to be, like in that neurodivergent spectrum of what we would call openness, right? Open to new ideas, open to new ways of relating to things, open to, can we just get one new perspective that maybe we didn't have before that will help us shift the conversation, shift the dialogue, and hopefully invent some new cultural form.
So, Chris, I think it's very interesting to see that there is this untapped use of our brain. And I think it's clear that, there's things that we all could be doing to open your mind a little bit more. And I'm wondering, have you used psychedelics in a coaching setting at all with, people that have come to you, or have you explored that route at least?
So I think one of the first things we want to do is distinguish this thing called the brain and this thing called the mind. Because I think most people would collapse the concepts together, and they're two very different things, right?
Okay.
So we have this thing called a brain, and it wires up, and it has a bunch of functions, and it regulates certain aspects of it. But there's this larger thing called the mind, and the mind is really inseparable from the entirety of our nervous system, the entirety of our body, right? So when we talk about shifting the mind, we're actually bringing in our whole being into that discussion, and it's moving beyond. So it's getting beyond developing just. It's not like a computer that I'm trying to program.
Right.
It's not a linear thing of let's get into the brain and we'll reset some levers and registers.
Yeah, it's not just that simple sometimes.
Yeah.
I think, concussion victims would look at that and be like, hey, this would be perfect if we could add some more zeros and ones in here and be back to where we were.
Yeah, I wish we could, and I certainly share that, that experience of I've had 4 severe concussions in my life, which actually is a part of my own developmental journey and part of why I came to coaching. Yeah. So to answer your question about the psychedelics, so I do work with people who have gone through any variety of psychedelic programs. So there's quite a bit of expansion of psychedelic research and psychedelic testing. So there's the work of MAPS and Field Trip, who are doing clinical trials. There's quite a variety of clinical trials. And I do work with clients that have come out of these clinical trials and are then looking at, okay, what do I do now? I've used this substance, which has given me this transformative experience, and I'm looking to make sense of what the fuck just happened to me, and what does it all mean? And it's a little bit like, a kid going into a room with a Lego castle and breaking it all apart. And then we've got to kind of figure out, how do these pieces all fit together?
So it's about rebuilding, the normal that we had in our minds prior to that experience. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's part of it. I think, and this is actually the core of a series of research papers that I'm doing, which I hope to someday turn into a book. Most of what we read about in the pop culture on psychedelics is all talking about kind of the transformative, positive aspects of psychedelics. And my personal opinion is that there's a large mythology developing around psychedelics and what they will and what they're purported to provide. And I don't necessarily think that everyone's getting the full picture of what the trip is actually all about and what some of the pitfalls are.
Yeah, and even just in Canada alone, we've gone through a process where we've legalized marijuana most recently, and you've started to have, mushroom shops, even here in Ottawa, now open up.
Cannabis shops or mushroom shops?
Mushroom shops.
Really?
In the Byward Market. There's one there right now.
Really?
Shout out. I know who you are.
Wow.
Basically, where I'm getting with this, though, is that I feel personally we're going to get to a point where mushrooms are likely going to be legal in Canada. And
I expect so.
I think you're going to see a lot more research like that you're doing now open up because of the legality behind it, of it being more accessible, and maybe even just the public perception of it shift a little bit. So I guess, do you see, okay, what's your opinion on, where life could go for, some people if that were the case, if we have a more open society to allowing these things to be part of our lives?
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything, right? Anything can have positive effects, and the potential for it, there to be a real shit show is strong potential as well.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think I would still like to hear a little bit more about, how you see these types of aids working for people in a way that allows them to have a different perspective.
Yeah. Well, so there's just the basic neurological process that it's working through, right? So it's going in, and the way I think of a psilocybin or other psychedelics like DMT or ayahuasca, I conceptualize it as it's an organic process first and foremost. Most of what we read about in the popular culture are the quote-unquote spiritual dimensions of a psychedelic journey, of the transcendent experience, of the opening, of the subjective felt senses of what that spirit, that journey was. And then they go directly from what the subjective experience was to whether or not it actually cleared up the underlying condition, which was the reason you went for the experience in the first place. So did it clear up my anxiety? Did patients report that it cleared up their depression? These types of things. And then you get the statistics.
And what are those? Based on what you know.
Right. So I don't memorize the statistics, but high success rates in terms of people not having a recurrence of their depression or their anxiety.
So there is benefits.
There's absolutely benefits. What we don't hear about is we don't hear much about what I actually think is actually a fairly large percentage of the population that goes through that. We actually don't hear the long-term studies in terms of what that longer-term integration looks like. We don't hear much about like what I would call the phenomenological experience of like what is it actually like to have your brain excavated?
Yeah, right? I want to know that.
Because this isn't just it's not
NANI? Yeah, I want to know that.
Because this isn't just, it's not just
explosion.
It's not just a spiritual journey, and whatever that means, but it's actually an organic process. I equate like a psychedelic journey more to like having your brain excavated like a mine.
Okay.
Right? So it's like if you were digging underground and putting in a gold mine, you'd be going in with a jackhammer and cutting out, ground and carving out new tunnels underground. That's exactly what we're doing when we're doing psychedelics. We're actually boring holes through our brain for new neural pathways to take hold and exist.
Yeah, and I'm glad you explained it like that because I was about to say, that kind of seems very problematic.
Well, it can be. It can be quite, like the physical symptoms of that when somebody's going through that. It's like, and then, to continue on that analogy, it's like if we go in and we bore tunnels under the ground and we just leave that kind of freestanding, what is it that we expect that's going to happen? Well, one of the things we expect that's going to happen is eventually that, tunnel that we carved is going to collapse. Right? It's not going to hold its structural integrity.
Yeah, there's only so much that you can do before it impacts your life negatively.
Yeah.
And I think you have to go into it with a clear understanding that, there's a purpose that I'm doing this for. There's the right reasons. And I think, unfortunately, that doesn't happen all the time. But I definitely, myself, have been exploring it, I would say for the right reasons, which, maybe led to this podcast,
Yeah, maybe, eh? Yeah. So when I talk about like it's something deeper happening inside of you, right? What I'm witnessing is that there's something, it's not just having confidence, it's not just knowing your shit, but it's actually something deep within inside of you that I feel is shifting, that has you be willing to take a risk here and be present in the public eye.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to do a mini coaching session and just have you maybe analyze, because I'm an open guy. I think that's why I started this podcast, was to be a little bit more open with the community and have people recognize that, you know, there are struggles that you will go through, and, you know, you can overcome them. Like myself, you know, personal, but more even career, you know, there's times where self-doubt really plays a role in how I approach things and, you know, what I share on Instagram and just how I navigate self-promotion, you know?
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to go through a mini session with you if you're open to that.
Yeah, I'm game.
So
yeah,
I'll let you,
safe for you.
You know, maybe ask me a couple questions then.
Yeah.
Or lead the conversation, I guess I would say.
Okay. So, like, a place to start would be, like, if we're going to spend some time doing any coaching or therapy, it's like to set an intention.
Right, okay.
Yeah. And the way I would ask that would be, it's like, whether we do this for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or an hour, it's like, what would you most like to walk away with for yourself?
I think right now, you know, even based off of things that I've been doing for myself since the turn of the new year, you know, hearing more like-minded people talk about their experiences and just being more open to different avenues of thought within my career. And I think if I can walk away with this with a new perspective that maybe I implement into my day-to-day life, that would be most beneficial.
Okay, I don't know if I totally caught that.
Well, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is, you know, through coaching, you know, even coaching that I've seen, that, you know, even Chris Doe, who is someone I look up to, shout out Chris Doe in the future. He has coaching built for very much people like myself, creative directors, photographers.
Yeah.
And it's all about, you know, where are the weaknesses and where we can, you know, solve some things within your business, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a different perspective on how I would operate things as a leader.
Yeah.
And I think because I am in a position of a leader with Phantom Productions, from the coaching that you can maybe offer, maybe it's just a leadership style that I'm shifting and having new perspectives on how to lead a group of people to that creativity that we need for success within our business.
Yeah, so maybe I can mirror this back and just play back what I'm hearing. So part of it is, like you talked earlier about this confidence question. And something's shifting, and maybe there's more that can shift. There's kind of like an underlying question of
100%. Hey. You know, I no matter how much success I have right now, I still know that there is infinite potential.
Yeah.
You know, nothing's saying that, and I know there's a few people are going to laugh at this, but there's nothing saying that I can't even take the business from where it is now, from doing advertising work and, you know, small time commercials and, you know, web videos or web animation, to making some sort of picture that gets, you know, a Emmy award, you know, something like that.
Yeah. So there's this potential, and there's a lot of different, like, we could spend a long time figuring out all the different facets of the potential. Part of it's operational. So you talked about this other individual that is in the industry, your industry, can go in, help you see operationally where you need to get better. Part of it might be interpersonal, so it would be how to lead others, how to motivate others, how to inspire others. One of the things you focused on was, you know, can we find your weaknesses to, you know, help you lean more into strengths and kind of shore up some gaps, right? So those are a few of the things that I'm hearing.
Yeah, and I think, you have to have some self-awareness to know that we all have weaknesses, and there is always room for improvement, right?
Yeah.
So I think I'm just in a mindset these days that, hey, I'm open to hearing it from anybody and anybody.
So, okay, so there's two things that I want to start with. There's lots that we can unpack from here. First off, to put in my coaching into perspective. So I work both as a coach and as a therapist within what we call the theory of developmental psychology, right? Why is this important? Because we talked about, that 60%, 75% of adults that kind of hit the wall of development at 25 to 35. We want to unlock that for you and get you on an upward trajectory of continuous growth and development.
Exactly.
Right? That's the fundamental goal. So one of the things that I just want to start with is unpacking this notion of confidence.
Okay.
Okay? Because everybody with COVID, I probably there probably isn't a client that I work with that at some point hasn't brought in anxiety and self-esteem and confidence.
Yeah, and I mean, I have anxiety 100%. As someone that has ADD, ADHD, I think it kind of comes with the territory. But, there's anxiety about, even sending off that edit that we just finished to the client and hoping that they're satisfied / going to return as a customer to work with us on more projects. The anxiety of hitting, certain dollar amounts for us to have profit, to, be in a space like this. Yeah. There's a lot of stress that goes into that day to day for me that I have never been able to control.
Right. So one of the things we want to start with is, and this is actually going to help us with the second piece, which is, are we focusing on strengths or weaknesses? Is we want to start with reframing what we understand anxiety, things like anxiety and ADHD and confidence to be. So I need to give you, is it all right if I give you a little bit of theory?
Of course.
To kind of ground the conversation. So in the popular culture, we're kind of led to believe that there's this thing called confidence, that there's this thing called self-esteem, that there's this thing called anxiety. Like I could point to it in you, right? When clients come to me and they talk about their anxiety, they talk about, I have anxiety, as if they just wish they could give it away and they want someone to teach them how to give it away.
Right.
Someone gave it to me. I picked this up somewhere. I don't know where I picked it up. I picked up COVID, right? And it's you didn't pick up anxiety like you picked up COVID, right? So the first thing is that these pop culture notions of anxiety and confidence, they're complete bullshit, right? So let's break it down. So self-esteem, which is what most people, high self-esteem translates to confidence, is a function of a couple of core personality traits. So one personality trait is the degree to which we're introverted or extroverted, right? So introverted means
I'm very much an extrovert.
You're very much an extrovert, right? So generally speaking, if you're more extroverted, what it means is you're gonna resource your energy and your recovery. You're gonna feel resourced when you go and you interact with other people. You're gonna be energized by it.
100%.
Is that accurate?
That's 100% accurate.
Yeah. So generally speaking, people that are higher in extroversion are going to have lower or higher self-confidence, higher self-esteem, and lower anxiety just because they can navigate the world more freely. The second piece is what we call a personality trait called neuroticism, right? So neuroticism it's not kind of in my generation, we would think of Woody Allen as the poster child for neurotics. But really all it means is how sensitive we are to our environment.
I'm a pretty sensitive person.
Yeah. So, who do you think is going to demonstrate more self-confidence? Someone with high neuroticism or low neuroticism?
low.
Yes, and why do you think that might be?
Maybe it's because they can just even articulate how they're feeling to people more so.
Yeah, I think it's more on the lines of like, and this kind of crosses over to like people with ADHD, like you and I, and people with that maybe are on the autistic spectrum, right? Which is the person who's high in neuroticism is actually picking up more visual and auditory and sensorial clues of their environment.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? And so there's more information processing that's going on, right? And one of the things that we know about the human brain is like the more data inputs you have, the more you're constantly working with the unknown, right? So it's both for creatives, this capacity, this high sensitivity to our environment is both our superpower, and it's also our kryptonite.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? And so one of the things that we look at when I'm working with clients with high anxiety, so basically is to understand that both this issue of introversion versus extroversion and neuroticism, which is like the core of sensitivity to environment, they're actually both mediated by the environment.
Right.
So what we're dealing with anxiety is we're dealing with an issue of environmental complexity.
Yeah, and I think it's worth saying that I've always been someone that even if the day isn't going that great, a lot of people don't know. I still carry myself as if, this was just as amazing of a day as it was yesterday,
Yeah.
And I had the nickname at one point Smiles because I just smile so much. But there are definitely times where I'm just putting on a face.
Yeah, so this is where we hit that edge, right? Are we in kind of a coaching and developmental trajectory, or are we more in a therapy kind of trajectory? And sometimes it's hard to tell which is which. But, in the case of anxiety, one of the places where I would go to next, and you can tell me if this feels safe or not, would be to just look at, so we've got some environmental sensitivity, and we've got some behavioral patterns of I'm always putting on this face, my game face, of things are okay, even though I might be completely fucked in the head because my best friend just killed himself.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And, does this feel like a safe conversation for us to have
here? Yeah, this is fine to go down. I think it's been public knowledge that I did lose one of my best friends recently to an overdose. And, he was someone who was just a different human in the sense of the no fucks given attitude, but also the playfulness that he brought at the age that he was. At 35, a lot of people get trapped in, and I don't want to say trapped, I'm sorry. There's a lot of happy people out there. What I was going to say was a lot of people, start families and, their priorities shift.
Yeah.
And he still somehow found a way to need a slushie to get through the day, which was something that I would do in high school,
Yeah.
And I do think that, that trauma of losing him has definitely shifted, even how I approach my own mental health, being more open about it and being able to talk about it, just because I think, especially in the industry that I'm in, not enough people, go down that road of letting others know that it's a wild ride as a creative.
Yeah. Yeah.
You have this thing called Instagram that feeds a fucking process in your mind that just is not realistic.
Yeah.
But yet we know this. Like, I can identify that Instagram really screws with my mind sometimes. But I still feel the need to get to 35,000 followers or 10,000 likes on a photo. And if I don't get that, it's like my world is crumbling, you know?
Yeah.
And even during COVID, and this is no offense to some people that likely are watching this that I know personally, I had to mute some of my closest competition in the city, because, you know, I would see, hey, I'm on a shoot today, you know, we're doing XX next, and I was like, why am I not out working? Why didn't I get the call to go out to work today? How is this person, you know, still finding success in a world where nothing is happening, not much is happening, you know?
Yeah.
And I think I'm getting back to self-doubt here, where it's so hard to trust that whatever you're doing as a creative is enough or worth, you know, the recognition from other people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, part of what I'm hearing is, like, there's a bunch of questions in there, right? Like, that maybe we don't even have to answer today, but I'll just throw some of them out. One question would be like, what constitutes my sense of identity? Like, how much of my identity is in what's being reflected back to me through Instagram?
Yeah, I think if I were to answer that, or at least where I want my identity to be, I think that's another reason why this podcast started, was just, you know, let's be an individual that is a leader from the community. Let's try to lead from within. Yeah. And I'm not saying that in the sense that I need to be put on a pedestal above everybody else, but I definitely want, even from my career, to have a legacy, you know, to be remembered for something. Yeah. And I think, you know, what are we at world population right now? Like something like 8 billion people or something like that. You know, that's a lot of bodies that probably feel the same, some sort of legacy. Yeah. And is it really possible for everybody? Well, define legacy, but and again, if I'm being completely honest here, you know, I've always wanted to be famous.
Hey, I want to be famous.
You know, I think that's a real, you know, at the end of the day, I think I've always wanted to be well respected. Well respected, you know, and well received from everybody else. Yeah. And maybe that's a vanity thing.
Well, let me ask you, so, I mean, part of it depends on how you set yourself up for that, right?
Yeah.
One of the things we're always asking, especially on the therapy side of the work that I do, is our self-analysis truly compassionate to ourselves?
Definitely not, you know, like for myself, at least. Yeah. You know, I'm pretty hard on myself. Yeah. Yeah. And I'll go back to Instagram, you know, like there's photos that I'll look at that I want to post, but I get caught in this thing of what are other people going to think if they see the flaw that maybe I know in this photo. Yeah. And then I just don't post it. Yeah. And this goes back again to self-doubt, right?
Yeah, so this comes back to like your question of, Chris, can you help me figure out my weaknesses or work through my strengths? And, you know, the reason the question around compassionate is important is because we can't make any developmental progress from a place of judgment and self-criticism. So we're always looking for how to open up that space of self-compassion. So one question that I would ask for you would be, is it a normal human need to want to be a contribution to something bigger than myself?
I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think if you ask most people, they would say yes.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, so like with people early in their career, one of the things that I distinguish for them is this difference between work and career, right? Where work is what we do, you know, we go to work 8 to 10 hours a day or whatever. We get, you know, we make money for it, and that's work. And a career is slightly different, right? So a career is probably better conceptualized not by what we think about ourselves, but what other people think about ourselves. In the sense of, at the end of our career is this collective summation of who we are as a contribution to other people, right? And when you're planning and engaging and working to motivate yourself and, you know, and deal with the uncertainty of things like, you know, our crazy fucked up operating environment with COVID, right? Positioning yourself from this perspective of who am I as a contribution in the world is one of the first fundamental shifts that we have to make to reorganize ourselves in our environment and then begin transacting with our environment around that center of attention.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. I think, you know, for myself, I think including my community through venues like this is something I felt important because of the information that I wanted to get out there that people could learn, but also, you know, elevate the brand a bit, you know,
Yeah.
Leave a mark that, you know, hey man, if YouTube's around in, you know, 100 years and some kid's watching this video, you know, that's kind of cool to me too. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and there's something deeper there though. Like I think, like one of the things that I heard in what you said that kind of touched me was this recognition of your friend who passed away.
Yeah.
And his life as a creative.
Even though, you know, he wasn't, you know, an artist, he was an artist.
Yeah.
You know, he had that creativity to him. But his life as a whole was very unique, and I think there's some creativity to that, you know?
Yeah, and part of what I heard that was there's almost an unspoken question. Maybe I'm just projecting. You can tell me if it resonates or not, but it's something like, is there a way to up-regulate our creativity while at the same time reducing the amount of suffering that we experience as creatives?
I mean, that would be a question I would have for you.
Yeah.
I think obviously there's got to be a balance in there somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, I would almost see what your thoughts are on.
Well, I mean, I think you're doing it here with this podcast. You know, I think that's part of that's part of how I see you as a contribution in the world.
Right.
Right? Is like I've been really struck by the other creatives that I've seen you engage with and how much you just desire to play in that team space, that communal space of creativity.
And I'll be honest, like, it wasn't always like that for me.
Yeah.
You know, especially when I was a freelancer, there was a lot of, I don't want to say animosity, but jealousy 100% about who was getting what contract and, you know, what relationships were being built that I had missed out on, or, you know, ideas for personal projects that I seen and been like, how the hell did I not think to do this?
Yeah.
And yeah, there was a definite time where I wasn't really a team player within my community.
Yeah.
And I think there's been a shift within me recently that I have to let go of that, because at the end of the day, we are all in this together.
Yeah.
And as much as I didn't see it before, the successes of my peers are just as beneficial, maybe not financially, but beneficial for the community, for all of us to, have success.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't be, a domination of one person in the industry.
Yeah.
And that's definitely, I was there at one point. I remember thinking, if I won $1 million, you know what? I'm just going to make everybody work for me, and own this corporation. This, this thing that, there was only one place that you could go to get photography.
Yeah.
And it all funnels through, And I hope that, people watching this right now can understand that that's definitely not where I am anymore. And if you are watching this and you feel that way or have felt that way, it's beneficial to move away from that, I think.
Yeah, and so when we talked earlier about kind of stages of adult development or human development, this transition that you're talking about, this dominance, what we might call very egocentric stage of development it's well documented, it's well understood, and then that transition out of it is also really well understood and well documented.
Yeah.
And so, knowing that, when you think to the future, and you think to the future, this possibility of creating a more team-oriented, kind of community-oriented sense of how you generate and how you bring creativity into the world, how does that leave you feeling?
I mean, unfortunately, I didn't know my grandparents, and I think back to them, and it's like, what did they leave behind?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, with, only one I can really identify having a true legacy, other than, the children that they brought into the world.
Yeah.
And I guess I'm looking at it from a career standpoint kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
My grandfather, who immigrated from Greece, was a painter. And I mean, painting your house.
Yeah.
And it's an honorable thing, He, was able to provide for a family that, went on to get further education, that created another family and another family and another family. But, for me, it's almost like I have this underlying pressure to have a mark on society that is very much a tangible thing that people can see, and that could be photography or video or animation, but is it being the award winner of X award for that year in that category? Now a lot of people will say awards mean nothing, and they don't really, but everybody loves to get them, let's be honest. And I think, even just navigating the internet here, my legacy is on the internet. There is a website with the body of work that I've created over the years. And in this realm of creativity, there's this notion that nothing's really new anymore. We're just taking a thought process that we've seen, or an example that we've seen, and funneling it through our own means of creation, and then spitting it back out again, right?
Yeah.
And maybe that is how my work gets perceived. Maybe it's, hey, I love what he did here. I want to try to make this my own now. I would love that, but you don't know that. That's not something that, people come to me and say, hey, I saw your photo. I wanted to make my own. Just wanted to show you. That doesn't happen. Even with the people that I've looked at their work and, mimicked.
Yeah.
And maybe it is an ego thing, maybe I need that validation of hearing it from people, or, being rewarded somehow through accolades that come my way. But it definitely, for me, if I was to define what I would hope for a legacy, it would to be literally a stamp on the industry that, that's a name that we remember.
Yeah. Yeah. And is there anything wrong with that?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Because, we all have to have goals.
Yeah.
And, I look at, some people in my life that, didn't get too lucky with the career paths that they got to take.
Yeah.
Be it dropping out of school or, having a child early that, forced them to provide instead of, expand their mind. I think for me, it definitely needs to be a public thing.
Yeah. Well, there's something, like that's the epitome of being that extrovert, right? Which is, wow, I don't know what the fuck it is, but goddamn, that energizes me.
Yeah, 100%. So, I've opened up a bit here about, my development through the years.
Yeah.
And I think, we do have a lot of students that tune into this, and I think it's important to state that, there's definitely been a growth within the body of work that I've created, but also the person I've become.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, part of what I'm hearing is like there's who you were when you came out of college, photographic school.
Yeah.
Right. And, we all have what I call or outer development goals. Most of us spend most of our life on the outer development goals. I got to get a job. I got to get a better job. I got to get promotion. I got to get, these
a house,
assets,
a car,
house,
a wife.
car, a wife, kids, tuition, college, so there's all these outer development goals. And what most people spend very little time on is seeing they underestimate the amount of inner development goals and inner development milestones that need to continually shift and adjust in order for us to have that really nice, clean trajectory in that developmental arc of our career.
Yeah, 100%. I think that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, so I've heard from you, not only has that inner development, it's started to shift from like maybe in your early career where it was non-existent or highly unconscious, to now it's like there's been significant life circumstances that have changed in the last 5 years, and it's like that inner development aspect it's almost like it's in your face now. It's like always present.
Yeah, definitely. Even with COVID, there was a lot of awareness that as a freelancer at the time when it first happened, how am I going to afford to live in this house? How am I going to provide for the people around me? Or even myself, and it was a financial thing very much. And it put me in a situation where I had to look at the longevity of this career that I was going to have. And that's why Phantom was created, basically. But while creating Phantom and creating a company, an organization that was going to have employees, there was a lot of expanding of my mind that had to take place, be it through books that I was reading or other podcasts / vlogs that I was just watching online that allowed me to grow as a businessman or as a leader. And I think that's been a fun process, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm still doing that today, you know? Like, there's a lot of material that I take in hopes of reaching that new potential.
Yeah. And that's really the key to that second half of our lives, right? You hit that kind of midpoint, and it's like, how do I make that second half of my life really come alive in a way that maybe it wasn't in the first half, right?
Excuse me, guys. No, not COVID.
Not COVID.
We did rapid tests.
Yeah. So whether it's that intentional inner development, whether it's, some psychedelic that we ingest, whether it's just getting out with, your favorite girl and getting your yayas on,
Yeah.
All of these things are fundamental to coming alive as a creative.
Yeah, 100%. I think that kind of concludes the coaching session of this.
Yeah.
And I appreciate your time with that. And I hope that, maybe some of the viewers that are watching this can take away some of those questions we have to answer from within to potentially find what really are our struggles, and what we, being open with ourselves is a huge part of this. Allowing our, for me, not only did I've done this coaching session with you here, but I'm seeking grief therapy for my friend, and that allows for me to self-evaluate a little bit more. And I think that was my hope today, was that through the conversations I was able to have with you, people that are watching this could take away some key points that allow for some self-evaluation of themselves.
Yeah, and I'd like to just touch on that mental health issue and just kind of bring it home. More people are dying from suicide than any other source of mortality right now on the planet.
Yeah.
Our mental health crises, because of our culture, because of COVID, is at an unprecedented low, right? And we need to work to solve that. People need to feel that they can reach out and ask for help. One of the ways I think of the shift, my biggest hope for our culture with the advent of psychedelics is that our conversation around mental health can shift.
100%.
That we can use things like psychedelics to actually die more gracefully. Not in a literal sense, but in a metaphorical sense. That when we get to that place in our lives where, regardless of what caused us our trauma, that we can learn to let that old identity kind of just die gracefully.
Yeah.
Right? We can shed that skin like a snake sheds a skin, and we can just let it go rather than sit in our quiet suffering like your friend had to.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I think, there's a lot of people out there who have likely felt a lot of the things that I've been through.
Yeah.
But have yet to hear it from someone that they identify with.
Yeah.
And this isn't a subject that I see a lot of, within the arts community. And, I had put a post out on Instagram a couple weeks ago talking about the fragility of the creative community and our mental health. And it was very well received. And I think part of that was, someone like myself taking a risk and saying, hey, you know what? I'm going through some shit, but it's okay.
Yeah. Not only is it's okay, but I'm going to be okay.
Yeah.
And we're going to be okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Chris, I thank you again for being here today. If anybody wants more information about Chris's business, you can visit www.humaxis.com. Yeah.
It's up there now. It's going to be going through some radical changes in the coming months, but yeah, the current form of the business is up there now.
And also, we'll be throwing some links in the description for this, for mental health hotlines within Canada. I think it's fair to say that it's very much okay to reach out, even if it's having just an open conversation with a friend, or if you feel you need, it's also okay to seek help from external organizations or people. So I hope today that after viewing this, some of you who were maybe apprehensive about exploring your mental health or your mental growth feel more comfortable. And it's not that scary, in the last hour and a half, I've had a good time, I don't feel, on edge leaving this conversation. I feel relieved leaving this conversation. I feel, that I've walked away with even more knowledge than I had prior to talking to you, even though I've known you for so long. So, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes our episode. We are still looking for sponsors. Bubbly still has not come through. So if anybody here knows anybody at Bubbly, please, Chris, do you have, by any chance? You're a fan though, right?
I'm a big fan of Bubbly. I do not have any personal contacts at Bubbly.
Well, Bubbly,
is it Bubbly or is it Buble?
Buble. Well, we are in Canada, right? So we should promote the Buble side of this, just because of, Michael Bublé's, claim to fame within Canada. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in once again. We smashed our goal on the last episode and reached 5,000 views. Help us get to 10,000 views on this episode. I would love for more people to hear about, Chris and my conversation today. So be sure to share this, hit that subscribe button, and tune in next time to the Creative Mindset Podcast. I can't tell you what we're going to talk about next, but it'll be fun. Thank you for joining us today. Take care.